Chapter 20. A Tiny Human. The story is told by Mary. Don't worry, I won't give you a blow-by-blow account of the birth. It's probably enough just to say that it lasted a long time, and it was very painful, and there was more than one point when I genuinely thought I would die. Joseph was possibly even more terrified than I was. Meanwhile, Joachim stamped his feet, and the mangy cow whose room we were sharing kept mooing and mooing as if she was the one giving birth. It was horrible. But at long last, there he was, Jesus. He lay in my arms, a few hours old, wrapped up in some rags one of the women from the inn next door had reluctantly surrendered to Joseph. His eyes were like liquid, and his skin seemed as soft and fragile as almond blossom. He had tiny fingers, which brushed against mine. He was puffy and wrinkled and red, but he was the most perfect thing I had ever seen in my whole life. I half expect him to start glowing, said Joseph in a whisper. Later, as I lay on the straw sacks that were the closest thing we had to a bed, I could hear women singing and gossiping in the street, soldiers shouting, children playing. Jesus was sleeping at last. Joseph went out briefly to buy food. He returned some time later, saying that the city was packed to bursting and everyone was talking about their arrangements for the Passover festival in a few weeks' time. It's odd, he mused. They are all so excited about the festival and so afraid because of the Romans. They don't realize that the most important thing of all has already happened. I knew what he meant, but to be honest, at that moment I was thinking more about the terror of becoming a mother than the excitement of who Jesus was. I'd looked after plenty of babies before, of course, but it's different when it's your own. Me and Joseph were responsible for this whole tiny human all of a sudden, and he was God's promised one. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried not to panic. Just then the old man whose tiny house we were staying in, Gadiel, his name was, burst through the door, waving his stick in the air. "Visitors!" he cried, and Joseph's father poked his way hesitantly into the room. His mother was more brisk. She started tutting as soon as she was through the door, taking in the damp walls, the uneven floor, and the bony cow who took up half the space. I picked out a few crumpled sticks of straw from the folds of the rags Jesus was wrapped in, hoping she hadn't noticed them. I smoothed back my hair nervously. "Have you got no one to help you?" she said in an accusing tone. "I tried to get the woman from the inn to come," Joseph told her. "She was here for the birth itself, but they're very busy." His ma's eyebrows shot up. She tutted again and told Joseph to bring some clean clothes and a bowl of warm water. He had to ask Gadiel for that, then send all three men out of the room. When she'd helped me wash, she returned her attention to the baby, unwrapping and rewrapping him more neatly. She held him up and looked at his face very carefully. She said, tightening her lips. Then she gave him back. "Jacob," she called to her husband, "let's go." As she swept out, she didn't trouble to lower her voice much. "He looks nothing like him," I heard her say. "That's not my grandchild." But Joseph's father lingered, twisting his hands together with an apologetic expression. "Well," he said, "I'm glad you're doing all right." As he put his hand to the door where he was a squelching sound behind me, the cow lifted her tail and several large brown lumps dropped to the ground. They lay there in a steaming, smelly heap. Joseph closed his eyes. "Ugh," said his father. "Yes, well," and he pulled the door shut. Later Joseph ran out again, this time to register us for the census. "I have no idea how long this will take," he said, biting his lip. "Will you be all right here on your own?" He'd said very little since his parents left. I knew he must have heard his mother's parting words. Perhaps it would be good for him to have something else to concentrate on. "You go out, I'll be fine," I told him, though my stomach felt queasy at the thought of being left alone. Inside my head a voice was shouting, I don't know what I'm doing, but I smiled. I'll see you later. After several hours, he still hadn't come back. The old man gave me a bowl of thin soup just before nightfall, hovering around me anxiously as I ate. He kept glancing at the baby who was sleeping in the pile of hay Joseph had heaped up in an old feeding trough. Is he coming back, your man? He asked several times. He'd better come back. I'm sure he'll be here soon, I answered, but Gadiel kept on muttering. I wondered what he would do if Joseph didn't come back. He'd been kind so far. Surely he wouldn't throw me out and the baby. But of course Joseph would come back. There was no question. He would. Of course he would. He would come back, yes. I tried to sleep, but my mind was full of leering thugs holding sharp swords and nail-studded clubs. They were tall and broad-chested, and they wanted to pull Jesus out of my arms. And then they turned to deal with Joseph, and they were raising their hands against me too. Eventually I dropped off properly, but then the baby started screaming and I got up to feed him, cradling him close and trying to stop myself from crying too. There is no rock like our God, I sang quietly, thinking how strange it was that I was saying that to him, of all people. But Jesus didn't seem much like a rock. After he seemed to have had enough milk, I studied his face in the pale moonlight that was seeping into our little room. He was so crumbled and so tiny and so very soft. I couldn't help asking the question, though I did say it in a whisper. Are you really him? He pursed his little lips and a few bubbles of milk dribbled out. I sighed, patted his back gently and put him back in his pile of hay. Then I lay there, watching the way the moonlight squeezed itself through the cracks in the walls, listening to the rustle of the animals as they slumbered in the straw, feeling the rough sackcloth prickle against my skin, waiting. But Joseph still didn't appear. This is horrible, I murmured. This is horrible, this is horrible. My voice sounded like Abigail's, after she'd been told off, a thick voice with a whimper at the edges. I squeezed my eyes closed in prayer. Lord, help. Then I heard a crash from the next room, and the old man's raised voice, ragged with sleep. Who are you? What are you? Hey! The door banged open. 4 men tumbled down the steps into the straw. He's here, one of them said. We found him, cried another. They stood up and brushed themselves down. We've come to see the baby, they said.